Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. Today I've got the 5th installment in my Shining Force Retrospective series for you. This time around, I'll be showing and telling you all about Shining Force CD. Shining Force CD contains 16-bit remakes of the first two Shining Force Gaiden titles that appeared originally on the Sega Game Gear. But if you think that's all that's on the disc, well, you're wrong! We'll take a look at everything in the game in this episode, but since I already thoroughly covered the games on the Game Gear, I'm not going to bog you down with repeating the same stories in the same detail here, so I'm going to do a little bit more of a summary for those, and then we'll cover the new stuff in more detail. Aside from that, I'll also show you a few side-by-side direct comparisons of the Game Gear original and Sega CD versions of the game. As usual, after that, I'll give you a wrap-up with a review of Shining Force CD as a single packaged game. Now you know I like to start these retrospectives with a bit of history, but as far as Shining Force CD goes, I really couldn't find much worth talking about. So in my playthrough of the first Shining Force Gaiden title on the Game Gear, I pointed out some character name changes from the Japanese to the Western versions. Now we see some of that in Book 2/The Sword of Haja as well, including, oddly enough, the name of the main character. In Sword of Haja and Shining Force CD Book 2, the main character's name is Shu. In the US versions, on the Game Gear and Sega CD, it was changed to Deanna, which isn't typically a male name here. One bit of online speculation is that the name Shu was chosen for the character in the original Japanese versions to refer to Shugo Takahashi, who, if you've been watching this retrospective series, you'll know was one of the key developers of the Shining Force titles and was in charge of Camelot Software Planning, who worked with Sonic Software Planning until those two developers merged into Camelot. One quick note to anyone considering playing Shining Force CD on real Sega/Mega CD hardware. This game's save files are very large, and of particular importance is that if you want to see the whole game, you will actually need a working backup RAM cartridge. Let me explain. You need a completed Book 1 or 2 save on your internal memory, and then a completed save from the other book on your backup RAM in order to access Book 3, which is an original segment made just for this version of the game. So anyway, make sure your battery is good on your internal Sega CD backup RAM, and that you have space on your backup RAM cartridge for any real hardware playthroughs. If you decide to play via emulation instead, you won't have to worry about any of that. This game is also on the Genesis/Mega Drive Mini 2, by the way. Last thing before we delve into the games. I want to be clear that the new sections in Shining Force CD, Books 3 and 4, are not complete games. They are basically added bonuses, and they're much shorter than the main games. I also want to make sure that everyone understands that Book 3 is in no way related to the third Game Gear Gaiden title, Shining Force Gaiden: The Final Conflict. That game is not included in any manner in the Sega CD Shining Force CD. Anyway, Book 3 in Shining Force CD is essentially the length of one chapter from Shining Force Gaiden 1 or 2. Book 4 is a single but incredibly difficult battle. Oh, and by the way, as many of you pointed out, I didn't cover the optional boss battle at the end of Shining Force 2. Sorry about that. Book 4 in Shining Force CD is kind of similar, and I do include it here at least, so you'll get to see some crazy boss fights. Alright, let's get on with it. We begin with Shining Force CD Book 1, which is an enhanced Sega CD version of Shining Force Gaiden for the Game Gear. It's gotten what some may now call the Super Mario All-Stars treatment, with redrawn graphics, updated sound effects, and of course excellently redone music. In this case, we get symphonic Redbook CD audio. Now before we start, let me say, man, the music in this game is amazing. Yeah, it's mostly the same stuff from the Game Gear, but fully orchestrated, it sounds incredible. It may seem a bit commonplace today, early 2024 as I record this, but back in 1994 and 1995, when this game was released in Japan and the US respectively, it was still incredible. Now there's nothing really significant that's changed gameplay-wise here, but we do have a fancy new voiced opening to the game as a whole. It's nothing special and it's not really animated, but for a CD release, this was sort of the minimum level of presentation expected for a game's opening. Now remember, if you want to experience every battle from Book 1 in a little more detail as in my other retrospectives, you can check out my Shining Force Gaiden retrospective video, where I look at the original Game Gear version. Since this game is a remake, I'm going to do more of a plot summary here, and then show you some scenes of the Sega CD version and the Game Gear original side by side so you can really compare them. Shining Force CD Book 1 takes place 20 years after the first Shining Force game released on the Genesis. Henri is the Queen of Guardiana, which you'll notice is spelled differently now, and everything is all puppy dogs and roses since they've fully gotten over that whole nasty Runefaust invasion thing from the first Shining Force. Some nasties from the Kingdom of Cyprus show up at Guardiana Castle, led by the evil Waldal, and they kidnap Henri starting off the game. Chapter 1 of the game has the new Shining Force, led by a stranger named Nick. The Force starts out on a ship that's making its way towards the country of Cyprus to do no less than execute King Edmund, who is the evil man in charge of the evil Waldal. Throughout this chapter, the Force is heading towards a fortress. After winning their first battle on the ship, they're shipwrecked and have to fight off a bunch of enemies with sticks. Next up, there's an outdoor battle where the Force makes their way towards the Bastion. The fourth battle takes place on the outside of the Bastion, and the fifth and final battle of Chapter 1 takes place inside of it. Chapter 2 consists of 5 more battles. We begin by heading towards the town of Azrit in a pretty standard outdoor skirmish. After that, there's a cutscene in Azrit where the enemies are looking for Mayfair and the Force shows up to smack them down. After this town battle, our next battle takes place in the wilderness and has the Force heading towards Bazoo's tower, and again is pretty standard. Once we enter the tower, we immediately encounter Bazoo himself. He taunts us a bit in Battle 9 and wrecks up his own tower before scuttling away. We make our way through that, and in Battle 10, the final battle of the chapter, our goal is to reach Bazoo and take him out for good. Before we can deliver the finishing blow, Bazoo begs Waldal to save him, and he's teleported away to safety. But most importantly, here we learn that our hero Nick is actually the Prince of Cyprus. You know, the bad guys. Chapter 3 is a bit different and has 6 battles instead of 5. Things kick off on the docks where everyone lies about who they are to get access to Inner Cyprus. Things fall apart when Nick's evil uncle King Edmund recognizes him. You see, Nick's father, the rightful king, was killed and Edmund usurped the throne. The first battle of the chapter begins on the docks with your Force split up into 2 groups. Make your way through this, and at the end we run into the Beastman Gion, named Teddy in the Japanese version, who is thrilled to see that Nick is back and brought soldiers with him. We finish up that battle and the next one takes place in the wide open wilderness on the way to Gundal. And there's a quick silly little cutscene exclusive to the Sega CD version here, where the thirsty monk Sig tries to enter the women's tent and is promptly ejected. By the way, Gundal was called Gondor in the Japanese version. I guess they wanted to avoid any potential Tolkien lawsuits for the English version of the game. Anyway, to wrap up this chapter quickly, we have our next battle in a cave laced with traps, then another outdoor wilderness fight, and then finally inside Gundal Fortress, where we face and defeat the boss Dantum. Dantum says that he can't kill Nick. He's served his father too long, and recognizes that Waldal is brainwashed and is using King Edmund. Sadly, after that, he dies. Chapter 4, the final chapter of Book 1, has 5 more battles. We start out with a normal but difficult outdoor battle that ends with our Force taking out the usurper himself, King Edmund. Edmund whines about Nick being a traitor who killed his own uncle and then dies. Randolph shows up to ensure Nick that Edmund didn't mean it and was under Waldal's control. The next battle starts with Randolph telling us that Waldal is in that castle on the hilltop, so away we go. This fight is a bit tougher, but not too terrible. The next battle has us at the castle gates, and we have to contend with the boss Geppel in this one. There are some harder enemies there, but overall it's not too bad if you stick to the fundamentals. And then defeat Geppel and move on. Battle 19 has the Force inside the hall of the castle trying to take out 2 bosses, Bazoo and Frabel, while contending with some strong normal enemies. Battle 20 is our penultimate battle for this book, and it begins with Waldal summoning an evil monster with the catchy name of Evil Monster.
How about that?
In the Japanese original, it was named Majin, which translates as Devil. Our goals here are to take out Waldal and Evil Monster both. After we do that, Lug, aka Luke, aka Ragu, gives us the Sword of Haja and tells us to use it to take down Waldal. And finally, with Battle 21, in which we take out Super Demon-powered Waldal and finish things off, we complete this game. We don't get a totally happy ending, as an evil voice echoes throughout the area and one of Prince Nick's arms turns to stone. There you are, that's Shining Force CD Book 1 in a nutshell. As you can see, it looks much nicer than the Game Gear version. How much nicer? Well, let's compare the two of them for the rest of this section, shall we? So we're going to spend just a moment or two looking at these and then we'll move on to Book 2. So obviously we have a higher resolution on the Sega CD and more colors. The visuals are much more refined than those even found in Shining Force 2 on the Genesis, and there's less slowdown and flicker during magic effects and screen transitions than in those prior Genesis titles. Now the detail on some of the battle backgrounds is really fantastic in Shining Force CD. They are just very artfully done, and they just look fantastic and much better than any of the other 2D Shining Force games that appeared on 16-bit systems or below. Now the Game Gear Original's battle scenes look great for the hardware, but here I can just say the battle scenes look great, period. Again, even better than Shining Force 2, which was a big improvement over the original as far as the battle scene graphics go. Now I would like to have seen maybe a little more animation in this Sega CD version. We still only get 1 or 2 frames for most things, but you will see a lot of the characters have sort of an idle, almost breathing animation before they attack now, which is something that was new to this one that wasn't part of the original. So they did add little bits of visual flair here and there, while keeping, all the basics of the game intact. So yeah, this is a nice visual upgrade, but I do have to say the overhead maps really could have stood to look a little better. They're not all that great in Shining Force CD, and in some ways I think these don't look quite as good as some of those in Shining Force 2. But still, compared to the Game Gear original, quite an improvement all around. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to Book 2 now. Shining Force CD Book 2 is a remake of Shining Force Gaiden 2 The Sword of Hagia. And yeah, it gets the exact same treatment as the remake of the first Game Gear title. Again, it looks and sounds great, but there are no real major additions to this game from the original. There is one minor change here, however, that is very significant. In the original Game Gear release, in the last battle of Chapter 1, you could search a well to find the mime ticket for a silly little extra ending sequence. In this game, they've replaced that with the museum ticket, which is required to enter Book 4, which is a single bonus battle that I'll talk about in more detail later. Anyway, let's do our quick story summary, and again, if you want a fuller description of everything, check out episode 3 of this series, which is linked in the description and elsewhere. Like Shining Force Gaiden 1, Sword of Hagia is broken into 4 chapters. This game takes place over a total of 22 battles, so it had one more than the original game. Things kick off with a prologue in which we see some of the evil guys sacrificing a poor king named Emild to some god named Eom who we heard about just briefly at the end of the last game. From there, we see a little bit of a preview at Cypress Castle, and then it's on to Chapter 1. Chapter 1 begins with some of the crew from the first game getting ready to leave Cypress Castle. As they get ready to go, an injured soldier falls off some cliffs and is taken to Cypress Castle. Prince Nick tells those staying behind to take care of the injured soldier, who in the US release is named Deanna. Again, he was named Shu in the Japanese original, and no, I don't know why they gave him a girl's name. Anywho, while a bunch of the young Cypress soldiers are goofing off, the castle gets attacked. The first few battles are pretty typical for the series. This one starts out maybe a tinge more difficult than Book 1, but you'll know best practices by now if you've played the first game or any other Shining Force game. Some centaur named Graham steals the Sword of Hagia that we used to defeat Waldo on the first game at the end of the first battle, and our force pursues him. So for the next 3 battles, basically, we're just chasing Graham, trying to catch up to him, and we don't actually catch him until we get into battle number 5. Story-wise here, Graham's not a bad guy, he just took the sword to try and save his village from the wrath of the bad guys, who said they'd destroy it if he didn't get the sword. Anyway, this is the battle, number 5 now that I'm talking about, where you have to search the well to find the museum ticket. Don't miss it. And we're just gonna zoom right ahead to Chapter 2 here, which begins with us looking for the sword after Graham helped us by shooting down the gargoyle that stole it, but that pesky gargoyle dropped it somewhere below the cliffs that we're high atop right now, so we've gotta go find it. So we polish off those enemies, and then enter the castle, and King Emild apparently has the Sword of Hagia, and offers to give it back to us. Only when Deanna steps forward to try and get it, he tries to kill him instead. Because this isn't really King Emild, remember? This is Gordon. Emild was killed at the very beginning of the game in the opening cutscene for it. We pursue Gordon through a cave and catch up to him. There we defeat him and retrieve the Sword of Hagia, and soon learn that Nick is at Algum Fortress. We beat a bunch of Eom soldiers and steal their ship. And unfortunately, this ends with us getting split up into 2 teams when disaster strikes, and half of our forces on the ship and the other half is left behind. Chapter 3 has us divided into 2 teams. Deanna and company do a few smaller scale battles on their own, before we switch to Natasha and her group for a couple of battles. including one on top of Algum Fort. So hey, we finally reached one of our destinations, good for us! We learn that the big bad in this game is named Warderer, and that he's sacrificing royals to Eom. After switching to Deanna's team, everyone is reunited for the last few battles of the chapter. We also learn from Warderer that there is a traitor in his midst, someone who's been helping Cyprus all along. Chapter 4 begins with Hindle, Barbara, and some goons dragging Nick to where Warderer can sacrifice him because of that whole noble blood thing. Hindle and Barbara argue for a bit and then leave together with Nick, taking him to Warderer's shrine. We meet up with Gion from the first game, who joins us for the endgame section here. We have to do that annoying battle with the statue that can damage everything in its path that you saw in the Game Gear retrospective of Sword of Hagia. We eventually persevere and defeat it, and then move on to the next battle to take out boss Barbara. Next up, we take on the Ghost of Waldal from the first game. And hey, it makes more sense now since we actually saw him in Book 1. What I'm referring to is this whole scene made less sense in Shining Force Sword of Hagia on the US Game Gear release, since we didn't get Part 1 in the US, and nobody would have known who Waldal was. And then for the endgame section here, the last few battles, let's keep a long story short. Hindle is Deanna's brother. He was angry that Deanna was sent to Cyprus with little or no training and left for dead. He took that anger out on Warderer by helping Nick and putting him into a position to cure the curse on his arm that was placed on him by Warderer at the end of the first game. Warderer gets pissed and kills Hindle, sacrificing him to Eom to gain strength for the final battle. We take out the evil god Eom and everything's back to puppy dogs and roses, right? Well, almost. Deanna is desperate to try and save his brother, and has to be persuaded heavily to leave the collapsing cave, and that Hindle is dead and there's no saving him. Deanna finally relents and sees reality and goes with his friends. Now this ending is exactly the same as the Game Gear original, and he and Natasha head off for adventures together at the very end. Let's take a side-by-side comparison look at the Game Gear original and the Sega CD version for a few moments. So yeah, we can see the similar upgrades that we discussed both at the beginning of this section and back in Book 1. The battle backgrounds here look especially refined and are just gorgeous in this game. The map graphics themselves, yeah, they're a bit bland but vastly improved still from the Game Gear originals, as are the characters. Basically everything I said about Book 1 holds true here also. One thing I didn't really touch on, and I should have earlier, was the quality of the portraits. The portraits are fantastic. Just the use of color and the designs are great. And they're a gigantic step up from the Game Gear originals. So if you're a fan of oversized cartoony portraits and RPGs, well, this game has you covered. And all the same goes for the music improvement-wise. Much of it is shared with the original game. And then there are some tracks that do only appear in Book 2. So as we continue to look at these side by side, I just want to make one or two other quick points before we move on to Book 3. When you look at the Game Gear game, you have to consider that this was on portable hardware that had a very small, low-resolution screen, and also a very low-contrast screen that had terrible ghosting. It was really hard to see things when they scrolled. Not too big a deal in a game like Shining Force as far as the scrolling goes, but the colors appeared very washed out, and you didn't really get to see what that Game Gear's palette actually looked like. We see it much better today via emulation, than we ever did on real hardware back in the day. Today there are also lots of mods that you can get for real Game Gear hardware to put much better screens in it. And the side effect of the screens having much richer color and better contrast is that they also usually consume far less power, so the batteries last longer in the thing. Now I'm not going to talk about too much of those in detail here, these screen upgrades, but if you just do some searches here on YouTube or on Google in general, you'll find information. Anyway, that's enough of this comparative look for right now. Let's move on to the original content in Book 3. The original content in Shining Force CD, usually has quite a bit of hype, and I've got to say, I feel like it's a bit overblown because frankly, there isn't nearly as much of it as most people think. In print media of the time and the nascent internet, this game was considered quote-unquote one of the biggest RPGs ever, but really, it isn't. Every scenario in total can be completed in this game within roughly 24 to 30 hours depending on how experienced you are. And that's a good length, don't get me wrong, but there were plenty of longer RPGs already out at the point that this game was released. So Book 3 is sort of like an epilogue and is entirely original, and it only appears as part of Shining Force CD. It contains a new story and 6 new battles that are a bit longer than the average battles of books 1 and 2. If you're thorough, you'll spend maybe about 4 hours on this book, although you could probably finish it in roughly half that time, especially if your characters are pretty strong and you level them up a lot before finishing the prior 2 books. Now you can use any character you've collected in books 1 and 2 here at any time. I'll warn you though, even though they're not the best characters to use, you might want to use the ones that appear by default, since these are the ones that appear in Book 4. And in Book 4, you have a fixed party that you can't change. We'll talk about that shortly. So anyhow, back to Book 3. It's Nick's coronation day as King of Cyprus. The game refers to this awkwardly as his crowning day, which sounds more like he's being born than installed as a king, but what can you do? As the ceremony begins, a bunch of thugs show up at the castle, led by an old woman named Dava, to disrupt everything. Dava easily knocks aside Eric, Luke, and Jaha and storms into the throne room. Here, Dava belittles King Nick's accomplishments at defeating Waldo and Warderer, and wonders if he really is ready to be the King of Cyprus. Dava kidnaps Queen Henri of Guardiana and tells Nick she'll only let him be king if he can rescue Henri. From there, we're on to our very first battle. Battle number 1. Nick and the Shining Force head to Dava's mansion, which for some reason has a big graveyard out front. You know what that means? Zombie time! There's a little goofiness with Luke, Eric, and Jaha getting tapped on the back by zombies, but the 3 of them think it's each other, and then finally after some wackiness the battle starts. So a word here. First, Nick is the leader from this point on, so your game will no longer end if Diana is killed. You might want to regress now and select the characters you want to use instead of the default party, but like I mentioned, since these are the ones that you gotta go into Book 4 with, you might want to at least get them all up to level 20 before you go on and choose other characters. Personally, I forgot that for Book 4 you couldn't choose your characters, and I had a bit of a rough go of it, since a few of my guys weren't as strong as they should have been, because I used other similar characters that were frankly way better. Also, there are no weapons for sale in this chapter. Money is only good for reviving dead characters and buying healing items. You can find better weapons by searching maps or by having enemies drop them. The enemies in Book 3 are considerably stronger than what you faced up to this point, so be ready for that and try to optimize your experience gains and level ups. So anywho, back to this map specifically, you can farm experience here for a bit with enemies that respawn after you kill them. You can also search some of the gravestones for items. Personally, I would suggest that you take the time to level up a few of your characters in this fight with the respawning enemies, since the fights after this can be a lot harder. Now overall, this one isn't all that bad, and I spent a little more time leveling up here than I needed to, but it did help me in the future battles. Anyway, after we defeat the boss of this area, Dava taunts us to enter the mansion, and in we go. Battle number 2 begins in a bar with a load of drunken soldiers. They were celebrating our arrival, you see, but got a bit antsy since we took so long with that fight in the graveyard, and they decided to party before we got to them. A few of the drunkards hit on Mayfair, who easily slaps them away. Then a seemingly drunk and tired Chu Rao tells us his berserkers can beat us at any time. They don't need a full night's rest, and so begins the second battle. Now follow the advice of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy here, and don't panic. It might seem like there's a ton of enemies in this battle, but most of the soldiers in the room don't actually fight. They're essentially nothing more than background graphics. If you want to see which ones are the real enemies that are part of the battle, open the mini-map from the menu you get when you click on any map square that doesn't have a character on it. Now there are a fair amount of enemies on this map, but it's nowhere near as many as it appears. The annoying thing in this battle are that there are enemies that can confuse your characters. You'll also see kind of a funny bug where female characters are referred to as him and males as her when they're recovering from confusion. Whoopsie. This fight is definitely tougher than the last one, and you've got to be more careful if you want all or at least most of your force to survive it. Aside from the status effect inducing enemies, you'll find plenty of mages and long distance archers on this map, so you'll have to plan your moves carefully to make sure none of your characters are exposed to them. Also, there are a few barrels that have some items worth finding, including some weapons, so be ready to have Claude search them out. One weapon is in the upper left, and only a flyer can reach it to search it because it's behind other barrels, which are impassable to everyone else. Now Chu Rao at the north end of the map is a pain. He has an area of effect breath attack that can hit up to 4 characters at once. Make sure you're not placing multiple characters in his attack range, or this can go really badly for you really fast at the very end of the battle. Send 1 or 2 characters that can attack him at once, preferably 1 close attacker and 1 distance attacker, so that they won't have to be near each other, and then he'll go down pretty easily. I suggest keeping Nick away from him, so you don't have to worry about any deaths here, ending the map and making you start over when Chu Rao, turn occurs quickly, might occur twice before Nick gets to go once. After we take out Chu Rao, we go on to battle number 3. Battle number 3 begins in what looks like a little shrine with a koi pond in front of it. Some lovely ladies come to tempt Gian and Nick with some special attention, including that. What exactly is that? Well, I can't say for sure since the game isn't explicit, but use your imagination, I guess. Being the fine, upstanding character my Nick is, he turns that down. Which means instead we're gonna end up fighting all these ladies. Oh well. Anyway, egress right now if you need to revive anyone, which you probably do. And then it's on to the battle itself. Now it looks like this battle has hardly any enemies in it. Well, you should know by now that's not gonna be the case. Some female ninjas will emerge from the pond when you get close to it, and some more will drop down into the shrine from above on both the left and right sides as you approach to the north end of it. Aside from that, the 2 stone statues at the bottom of the map will spring to life and pursue your force from behind once you get about halfway towards the top of the map. You want to make sure that you never send characters out of the way by themselves on this one. Always send them with a buddy or two to make sure they can handle any surprise enemies. There are some items and stuff hidden in the trees, bushes, and the shrine itself that are found by searching. Our boss here is Kisaragi. She has Raijin magic, which has the same effect as Bolt. You want to try to take out all of the other enemies around her before dealing with her to avoid getting hit by large AoE attacks. You can lure the enemies away from the center and Kisaragi out, especially by heading up the right pathway and having someone near the leftmost wall. Then use flyers and archers to take down her guards, especially the Uzukis who have magic of their own. The standard enemies on this map, the Satskis, hit pretty hard, so make sure you keep low defense characters away from them whenever possible. Now this battle is probably the easiest one in Book 3 if you approach it the right way. Well, sort of. We'll come back to that in a moment. There's one battle you can cheese. But anyway, just stay focused here, march onward, and be careful taking out Kisaragi. After we defeat Kisaragi, it's on to battle number 4, which takes place in a room that's in the middle of being built. Bulldor notices the Shining Force and smacks 2 of his men around, annoyed with them for not being done yet. They knock over buckets of blue and red paint, and you'll see blue and red handprints and footprints throughout the map. If any of your force died in battle number 3, make sure to egress at the start here, revive them, and come back. Now this battle is a little bit harder than the last one, probably about on par with the second battle, if not a smidge tougher. And it's mainly harder due to the much tougher enemies in this one. But it's not too bad, it's definitely doable and you can definitely win it on your first try. Just watch out for enemies with large AoE attacks. If you don't know that term, AoE means area of effect. So we're going to do the usual things here, like not leaving our magic users too close to the front, and making sure not to bunch up our characters too closely together. One important thing to keep track of are the Lich enemies, since they have higher level bolt magic with an attack radius of 3, so they can hit a lot of your force at one time. Now about halfway up the map, Bulldor has some more construction done on it, with some new walls being put up. Bulldor himself isn't really too difficult a boss to overcome since he only has physical attacks. He is really strong, however, and his turn comes up very often, so you'll need to be careful when you're near him, and you definitely don't want to put Nick near him unless he's almost dead, since if he goes twice before Nick gets to go once, he could end up killing him. Anyway, take out Bulldor, and it's into the penultimate battle of Book 3. And here's battle number 5, the most annoying battle in Book 3 by far. Now you can cheese this one a little bit, or you can super cheese it, or you can just, fight it normally. I decided to stay on the straight and narrow and do this fight normally so you can see what it's like. When the battle starts, we're taunted by Dava and she makes us fight our shadows. In the opening scene here, Gyan and Mayfair punch their own shadows once and they just go away. Nick engages his own shadow and then the fight starts at that exact moment. And then we learn that, oh yeah, we're not going to be able to just punch those shadows once and have them die. So when the fight starts, the shadows will mimic every character's current status in the party and have the exact same equipment and items. So how can you cheese this battle? Well, you could switch to your weakest characters and unequip every weapon and ring that you have on everyone in the battle party. Then after the battle begins, you can re-equip all their stuff. The enemy will not re-equip stuff. They will just stay how they are at the start of the battle. Now the experience you get from attacking and defeating the shadows is going to be negligible, usually 1 experience, unless you have a really low level character attack a high level shadow. So don't even worry about experience in this fight. You practically won't get any. Now I chose to do this fight the real way and didn't unequip or switch characters. It's tough and I had to do it a couple of times, but it's doable. Shadow Nick and Deanna will rush anyone in range and use bolt level level 4 if you've got it already, and you should, and basically one-hit kill everyone that they use that on. Expect to lose a few characters to that right from the get-go when they can reach you. If you have magic users with you, you'll want to isolate them so that you're not hit with area of effect spells like Freeze, Blaze, or Bolt. Finally, there are places you can make choke points with strong characters that have high defense and a lot of hit points. For example, you can position characters between tables, blocking the enemy advance, and then just heal the character that's filling up that spot, basically creating the choke point. And while you have it blocked off, you can also use your ranged attackers to hit the other enemies that can't reach you because your other guys are blocking the way. So yeah, I fully acknowledge this battle can be really frustrating if you do it the normal way, but it is winnable. And let's talk about how you can super cheese this. You can let everyone get killed off and then come into this battle with only Nick and take off all of his equipment. Then at the start of battle, re-equip Nick, and then you'll get hit by, Bolt 4 from Shadow Nick, but he'll be literally the only enemy here and the only one you have to defeat to move on. So you can heal, and then his attacks won't do hardly anything at all to you because he won't have a weapon equipped, and you'll take him out in just a couple of hits. You get him with Bolt 4 once, and then basically with the sword once, maybe twice, and he'll be dead. So it's your choice. You can do this battle the right way, the cheese way, or the super cheese way. No judgment here. Now we're up to Battle 6, the final battle of Book 3. In this one, we're up against Dava herself, who has an absolutely nasty super long-range area of effect laser attack. Priority 1 will be to egress and bring back any of your dead. Priority 2 is to get your characters out of the way of her gigantic beam attack as soon as you can. She's gonna hit you once, you want to try and not get hit twice. You want to move all your characters basically one way to either side to get out of her range. And be warned, while Dava is the only enemy on the map at the start of the battle, you will have some other things to contend with here as you advance. Wonder Mushes will sprout out of the ground. They don't usually do much, but they do have an area of effect confusion spell that can be devastating if anyone, particularly Nick, gets confused. They should only take a couple of hits to take down with most of your party members at this point. Just try and get a couple of characters near them and take them out in one turn. More of these Wonder Mushes will sprout as you head further north. Then there's another really nasty surprise here. All the other bosses from Book 3 teleport in and join this fight. So you've got to deal with Chu Rao, Kisaragi, and Bulldor all over again on the same map. Bulldor tends to head to and join up with Kisaragi, and having the two of them near each other can be tough to deal with. So you want to try to keep them apart if you can. After you deal with them, hopefully you've got enough of your force still alive to take out Dava herself. Dava is a pretty typical Shining Force final boss. She has the area of effect Dava Breath attack, which is essentially Demon Breath, so you want to make sure you're really only engaging her with 1 or 2 characters at a time to limit the damage. I found Natasha's attack spell here invaluable to make each hit much more effective. Dava also has an aura spell to heal her and the magic mush next to her if you haven't killed it yet. So you'll want to carefully position your characters here, try to heal when necessary if you still have enough healing items or MP, and eventually you'll overcome Dava and complete Book 3. After the conclusion of this final battle, we're back inside and everyone's slapping Dava around, demanding to know where Queen Henri is. Dava tells Gian she's had enough. Mayfair realizes something fishy's been going on here. Then Henri shows up and explains to Nick that this was a test to see if Nick was worthy of being the King of Cyprus, and all kings have gone through it. Mayfair explodes in anger and chases Gian away. I do have to wonder, did Nick's Uncle Edmund go through this? Somehow I doubt it. Anyway, finally we return to Cypress Castle to see Nick's crowning day. Everyone's there, hooray! Then the little girl reading the book on the save and load screens tells us that Nick became a magnificent king of the peaceful country of Cyprus and closes the book. Then the ending of Book 3 plays where we get to watch a bunch of characters running and jumping around on some of the battle backgrounds. After that, we're on to Book 4. Okay folks, here it is, Book 4 of Shining Force CD. Book 4 is just one single battle, but it is an epic and epically difficult battle. This may be the single hardest battle in any Shining Force game ever made. You have to fight every single boss from Books 1, 2, and 3 on this single map in the museum. Book 4 starts with Nick and company visiting a museum that has statues of all the enemies they've defeated throughout their adventures. Unfortunately, all of these statues spring to life, and oh boy are we going to be in for a hard one here. Now the bosses are a mix, of course, of strong physical attacks and insane AoE attacks, and your job here is to have enough characters survive at the end to take out every last boss on the map. And you can't go to camp here, by the way. If you regress, it just takes you back to the start of the battle with the exact same party. I had to do this one a few times and spent about 4 hours on this map alone before I finally beat everyone, with all the times I had to do it and redo it. I'll tell you what worked for me, but I in no way claim that this is the absolute best strategy. I sent a few characters to take out the bosses on the left, particularly Dantum at the beginning. I sent a few to deal with him, and then others up the middle to deal with Geth Waldal, Solo, and Bazoo. I try to stop Bazoo from moving off to the left side of the screen, because he can be harder to deal with when he's bunched up with some of the other bosses. So you're in for some pain if you grab him and stop him early, and you'll get some AoE attacks cast on you, but it might save you some of your lives later on and make this map more winnable in the long run. So the next part you have to be real careful with as you make your way up the left side of the screen is Eom, or Iom, however you prefer to say it, who is at the top center of the screen. Now this game, sadistically, only gives us a single ranged attacker for this entire battle, Shade the Archer. Our paladins here are armed with lances only, no spears, so boy oh boy did the developers hate us. At least our magic users have items equipped that recover 2 MP per turn, so at least we don't have to worry too much about healing and using magic attacks. If you don't mind waiting a few turns, you'll always have enough MP to cast something useful. Anyway, because of the restrictions here, dealing with Eom is tough. You want to take out his 2 snake-like arms first, one at a time, keeping everyone else out of Eom's range so you don't get hit with Demon Breath. The arms can possibly do the Demon Breath attack too, but if you stick with Shade and keep him 3 squares away, they can't reach him. Now I know it's slow going when you do it that way, but try to take them out with just him and maybe one other attacker if you get impatient and you don't mind healing them. With Eom himself, stick with a high HP as a strong attacker against him and try to position Shade so he can still hit Eom, but will be outside the range of the Demon Breath attack when Eom uses the spell on the person in front of him. Eventually, you'll win, though it's probably going to be slow going here, and you may have to change characters out and heal a few times. Use Natasha's attack spell to increase the physical attack power of both Shade and whoever else you send against Eom to make life easier. Okay, now we're up to by far what I thought was the hardest part of this whole ordeal. We have 3 bosses just hanging around together up here. We've got Monster Waldal, final boss from the first game, Warderer, and Buldor, all right next to each other. They won't move out of their holding pattern until they can reach someone to attack. Here's where you need to do 2 things to win. The first is, you have to have an understanding of how the game's AI works, and the second is, you have to have a whole shitload of luck. Warderer has Bolt level 3 and lots of MP. Waldal can use Demon Breath. You can easily be hit by these attacks in succession, and their moves occur so frequently that you might die as helpless as a baby because their turns occur so quickly. I lost over in this section a lot. Here's what I did to finally win. I made the first move against one of them when I could reach them with a close-range physical attacker. The AI is more likely to do a single physical attack instead of Demon Breath or Bolt 3 when there's a character right next to the boss and no other characters in the range of the spell. You've got to focus on one of the bosses first, and I say it's whichever one you can reach with the most attackers first, whether that's Waldal or Warderer. Things get a little easier when you manage to take one of them out, but you're going to do the same thing each time. Try and keep characters split apart in ranges where they can't cast their area of effect spells on multiple of them at once. And especially try to keep Shade away from everyone else so that he's less likely to be attacked, and keep his attack power boosted with Natasha's attack spell. Anyway, once you manage to take down the 2 of them, which is no easy task, Buldor will be easy. Now Buldor is still possibly going to take out 1 or 2 of your force just because of how strong he is and how rapidly his turn occurs. If you get a chance to move a weakened character away from a boss like Buldor, do it. Put them way out of harm's way, set them off to the side so you can heal them later and move in somebody fresh. So if you manage to persevere there, we're left with just Geppel and Dava. Dava here never used her beam attack against me, so I don't know if she even has it on this map. Now I lured Geppel out first, and had everyone slaughter him and gang up on him to easily take him out. I then waited a few turns so that I could recover some MP, so I could cast Aura on 5 characters at once, maximizing that MP usage. Then I used attack magic to boost Shade and one other guy while they took on Dava. When the close attacker was weakened, I moved them away and sent in somebody else. And if you don't keep at it, Dava will heal herself with Aura. She uses Aura when there's no character within range of Dava Breath. Just be careful, don't screw up at the end here, don't do anything stupid. I know you want to win, but you want to make sure that you have somebody left surviving, and especially Nick. So after we clear out Dava, well, that's it. We have now completed every battle there is in Shining Force CD. And in the ending after we defeat Dava, it shows that it was all a dream in Nick's head. None of this actually happened, but him and his friends are indeed getting ready to go to the museum today. Alright, and then we are treated with the silliest ending credits in any Shining Force title ever. Now, this ending probably wasn't worth the effort, but it is really cute and it's worth seeing at least one time. And that does it for my comprehensive look at Shining Force CD. So Shining Force CD, like I said, it came out in 1994 in Japan, 95 in the US. Visually, it was a big step up from the Game Gear titles included within it, Shining Force Gaiden 1 and 2. Battle maps themselves could have used a bit more improvement, I think, but the added niceties like extra details and parallax scrolling in places really did help make those improved also. Now, the biggest problem with Shining Force CD is that those first two books, which make up roughly 20 to 24 hours of the experience, were stripped down portable titles to begin with, and while they're both good games, the lack of explorable towns and optional stuff we saw in Genesis Shining Force 2 makes this one feel like a big step backward compared to that one in the gameplay department. Also, I feel like there really needed to be more meat to Book 3. It should have given us more battles where we had a chance to develop more characters, and level ups past level 20 should have been more effective. Book 3 is where we get to play with any characters we want. That's where they should have really made some nice optional extras, like maybe some training battles and a hard optional boss battle that you could take on after you finish the main story battles. You could say, well, that's what Book 4 is. Yeah, but in Book 4 you have a set party, you don't get to use whoever you want. I would have liked a challenge where I could have used the characters that I wanted. So anyway, Book 3, it's okay, but the inherent silliness of most of it doesn't quite gel with the more serious tone of the first two games included, especially Book 2. And Book 4, like I said, yeah, that's just one battle, similar to the bonus boss fight at the end of Shining Force 2. The insane difficulty will turn off all but the most hardcore Shining fans, and the reward you get for beating it, it's really not worth the effort. Before my recent playthrough for this video, I had only beaten this battle one time when the game was relatively new, and I do remember it being super hard. In my old age, I can tell you I didn't remember it being hard enough apparently, because man was it tough. And then the music, I will say again, is just fantastic and some of the best you'll hear in any Sega CD game in my opinion. It's amazing that these are just Red Book symphonic versions of the little 8-bit tunes we heard on the Game Gear for the most part. They're just so good, and I never got tired of them, even if a few of the songs were repeated a little more often than they should have been. So a lot of the things holding back Shining Force CD were the same things that held back the Game Gear originals. Losing the town exploration and all that optional stuff that was in Shining Force 2 really detracted from this one a bit. In the end, Shining Force CD is a nice compilation of the first two Game Gear titles, improved enough to definitely make them worth playing again, with some extras that are a little disappointing but still present a real challenge to fans of the first two games. Overall, it pains me a little to score this one this way, but I have to give Shining Force CD a 7 out of 10. The game is good, and like I said, definitely worth playing. But when it comes to story, gameplay, everything in this game is a step backwards from what we saw in Shining Force 2 on the Genesis a couple of years earlier, or 1 year earlier, depending on your territory. What we get in Shining Force CD are basically two half-length games, a 3-hour epilogue, and a 2 to 4 hour boss fight at the very end, depending on how good you are. I wish both of the included Game Gear games had been expanded. They could have added some town wandering segments and woven them into the existing narrative. They could have given us some hidden extra areas and items to find. They could have added a few extra hidden characters not from the originals. We could have had a structure much more like the first Shining Force games on the Genesis. Instead, we got very direct Game Gear ports that have been extremely prettied up, but are still Game Gear games nonetheless. To conclude this, Shining Force CD, play it. It's fun. It's good. If you're a Shining Force fan, you'll enjoy it. You'll appreciate it for what it is. But at the same time, you won't be able to help but wish it was more than it is. In the next episode of this retrospective, I'll be taking a look at the final Game Gear entry into the series, Shining Force Gaiden 3, The Final Conflict. This was a Japanese exclusive title, and the only reason we can play that one in English is thanks to a fan translation. Look forward to that episode in about 3 or 4 weeks. We'll see how things go. So tell me everyone, what are your thoughts on Shining Force CD? Did you play the Game Gear titles first? Did you love Shining Force CD? Did you hate it? Did you wish it had more stuff in it? Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you want to support the work that I do here, consider helping me out on Patreon, Ko-fi, or through YouTube channel memberships. Anything is appreciated. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.